Is the Monroe Doctrine back in America? Was the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro a just act or an illegal one? Should America intervene in South America? Here's the point. Over the weekend, U.S. Special Forces Group Delta Force captured Nicolas Maduro in a targeted operation in Caracas, Venezuela. The 62-year-old dictator was indicted by the United States in 2020 on narco-terrorism charges and has been wanted for trafficking over 250 metric tons of cocaine into the United States annually, contributing to the deaths of more than 100,000 Americans from drug overdoses each year. Maduro was not recognized as the legitimate president of Venezuela by the United States, the European Union, and dozens of Western nations following his fraudulent 2018 election. Under his regime, Venezuela descended into economic collapse, with over 7 million Venezuelans fleeing the country, the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. Many of those refugees were funneled into migrant caravans directly to the U.S. southern border. The operation has drawn both praise and criticism. Argentine President Javier Milei applauded the action, calling it a victory for freedom and the rule of law. Mexico's leftist president, Claudia Sheinbaum, condemned it as imperialism. Many leftists in the United States have questioned the constitutional grounds, but this action has legal precedent. In 1989, then-President George H.W. Bush ordered the invasion of Panama to capture dictator Manuel Noriega, who was also indicted on drug trafficking charges. That operation did not require a congressional declaration of war, and federal courts upheld its legality. And let's not forget that both President Clinton and President Obama acted without congressional approval in Serbia, Kosovo, Libya, and Syria. If those interventions were justified, how much more justified is removing a narco-terrorist dictator whose power and government were illegitimate and not recognized by more than 50 nations? So how should we think about all of this? And here's the point. First, this action revitalizes the Monroe Doctrine and reasserts American leadership in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823, declared that the Americas were no longer open to European or foreign interference, and that the United States would view any such interference in the Western Hemisphere as a threat to national security. For 2 centuries, this doctrine shaped American foreign policy and kept hostile foreign powers out of America's backyard. Under the Obama administration, that doctrine was effectively abandoned. John Kerry announced in 2013, "The era of the Monroe Doctrine is over." But what did that produce? It opened the doorway for China, Russia, and Islamic terrorist groups like Hezbollah. China moved aggressively into South America with their Belt and Road Initiative, signing massive infrastructure deals with Venezuela, including one of the largest oil entitlement reserves, also building military installations and establishing intelligence gathering operations. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Maduro multiple times, discussing everything from oil exports to military cooperation. President Trump's action has sent a clear message. The Western Hemisphere is America's sphere of influence, and the United States government will not tolerate hostile foreign governments or terrorist operations in our backyard. Many today are dubbing it the Donroe Doctrine. This is entirely consistent with just war theory and America's long-standing foreign policy realism. Let's be clear, adopting the posture of being anti-intervention anytime there is an international conflict is not a conservative principle any more than being always pro-war is a conservative principle. Utopian or libertarian pacifism is not a conservative principle any more than imperialism is not a conservative principle. There is always a time and a place for America to act. to act justly, and to act in defense of our own interests. Taking Maduro out of Venezuela was one of those times. Second, ending the flow of illegal drugs into the United States required removing Maduro. Venezuela, under Maduro, became a narco-terrorist state. His regime partnered with Colombian drug cartels, providing safe harbor, laundering money, and facilitating the trafficking of cocaine into the U.S. The DEA estimates that Venezuela-based operations were responsible for trafficking over 250 metric tons of cocaine annually. But Venezuela isn't the only problem. Mexico's cartels control vast territories along our southern border, trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine. Notice the contrast in reactions we saw this last week. Mexico's president condemned the Maduro operation, a country that hosts some of the world's largest drug cartels and refuses to confront them. Mexico's government is very compromised when it comes to drug and human trafficking, bribes, and blackmail of government officials. There's a reason that the Mexican president will not support this action in the same way Zohran Mamdani and leftists in the United States oppose the collapse of socialism in Venezuela. Third, lest we forget, Maduro emptied Venezuela's prisons and sent his worst drug trafficking criminals into the United States. Removing him from power was just retribution. Remember Aurora, Colorado from just a few years ago? Venezuelan gangs from Tren de Aragua took over apartment complexes, extorting residents and terrorizing communities. That wasn't an isolated incident. Maduro deliberately emptied Venezuela's prisons and funneled convicted criminals into the United States across the southern border. Under Biden's open border policies, those criminals entered the U.S., bringing violence and chaos to American cities. Gang members have been arrested across the U.S., from New York City to Texas and to California. Many gruesome murders are tied to Venezuela specifically. Maduro used America's own immigration system as a weapon against us. This wasn't immigration, it was weaponized migration. President Trump's action sends a clear message. You cannot use America as a dumping ground for your nation's worst criminals without consequences. Venezuela will not weaponize migration against the United States, and those who do will be held accountable. Romans 13 is clear. Government exists to execute God's wrath on those who promote and practice evil. God ordained civil authorities to wield the sword and to be a terror to evil and to protect the innocent. When government fails to wield the sword righteously, evil goes unpunished and the righteous suffer. This isn't about nation building or endless forever wars. This is about protecting American citizens, securing our borders, and reasserting American sovereignty in our own hemisphere. It is the righteous use of power and the proper role of government. So pray for the stability and peace in Venezuela. Pray for the Venezuelan people who are no doubt grieving the tremendous loss that was endured under Maduro and who are now celebrating his just end. Pray for our nation. Pray for President Trump and our leaders to continue to act shrewdly and judiciously in executing a peaceful transition of power for Venezuela and the Venezuelan people.